We're going to keep moving, and it's my pleasure to introduce Tom Eisenhower, one of our founding ECA board members. Tom is an East Coaster at heart, but I know that South Georgian Bay, and particularly the Castle Glen area along the escarpment here, has become near and dear to him. And you might remember Tom and his company as the organization that was responsible for helping stop the mega quarry about 15 years ago. So Tom knows a lot about this sort of thing. Tom is going to be running our first panel, and I'm excited to pass the mic. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Show of hands, who wants to follow Kelly? Oh, we do. Come on up, guys. Come on up and take a place. And so, yes, my name is Tom Eisenhower. And this panel is maybe, it's perhaps better called Corridors 101. Fun fact, but true, when we chose the name Escarpment Corridors, we really didn't appreciate, to be honest with you, the import of the word corridors and all of the importance that could imply, that word. And had we just picked up the and called Kelly, we could have saved a couple of years of our time, I think. But so at any rate, we are missing two of our panelists. Do we have they were Michael in the room? Yeah, maybe he stepped out for a bio break. Here, running down the hallway, I see Michael and Thomas. Thomas around? Tom? There we go. There we go. That's fine. And Thomas, here we go. All right. Thank you very much. No, I'm nervous to follow Kelly too. I think we should all run. We should just leave. That was wonderful, and thank you for that. We could have, as I mentioned, saved a lot of time in the early years of founding the Escarpment Corridor Alliance. Had we just reached out to you and read your playbook, we could have short-circuited things by a substantial amount. So yes, my name is Tom Eisenhower, and with several of the others in the room, we're one of the founding directors of the ECA before the ECA was the ECA. It is my honor to host this panel of much wiser folks than me, and experts who in one way or another can bring some of their experience, their on-the-ground experience, to our project and give us some advice and hopefully give us some takeaways that we can think about and takeaways that we can implement ourselves. So our first panelist on the far side, Kaylee Doran. Kaylee is an interpretive guide at the Anishinaabe Cultural Experiences at Cape Croker Park up on the Bruce Peninsula. Thank you. Kaylee's going to bring the indigenous. We're going to try and do this with sort of the First Nations Indigenous view. We've got a local view with our next panelist, Thomas Virkos. How'd I do? Yeah. Tom's okay. We're going with Tom. I was going to go with Tom all the time, but I thought I would at least try. Tom is a program manager with a gem, with an organization called the Coots to Escarpment Eco Park System, which is located just outside of Hamilton, and a wonderful example of a corridor in a fairly urban part of Southern Ontario. So we're going to hear about that experience. The next person probably needs very little introduction to this room, Michael McDonald, who is CEO of the provincial treasure that we call the Bruce Trail Conservancy. And so we'll hear that sort of regional experience. And then our fourth panelist is Stephen Couchman. Stephen, first and foremost, is a proud resident of Clarksburg. He's a director of the Kalapur Trails Association, but more relevant for this discussion, he is a former project director with the Bhutan Trails Association, which Kelly flashed up on the screen earlier. So we're going to hear from one of Kelly's precedent funds that we talked about there. So. I'm going to address my first question to Kaylee, because I think, as always, we should start with the indigenous experience of the First People. And Kaylee, this is way beyond my area of expertise, but my sense is that corridors have always been central to the way indigenous communities have viewed the natural world. Am I right in that? And can you give us a sense of how indigenous communities have kind of long viewed natural areas in terms of interconnecting corridors and the role that maybe those corridors have played in natural ecosystems and wildlife habitat? And take it away.
Thank you, Tom. Ani Bojo, Kailin Dishnagas, Jijak and Dodom, Saking Nishingaming Andanjaba. So again, my name is Kaylee. I am Crane Clan. I prepared notes for once, and if my eyes seem to be a little watery, I'm missing a bio break right now. So I'm actually going to refer to my notes and not go off script like I typically do, because I think this is an important question. But you'll definitely hear me freestyle and riff it when we have questions and moving on through the panel. So yeah, Tom, you're absolutely right. Nature corridors have been and continue to be central to the way of indigenous communities and how we view the natural world. We call that the Anishinaabe worldview. So for indigenous peoples, including Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, the communities of Neoshingaming and Saugeen, the land is not merely a resource, but a living, interconnected, breathing system. The earth is alive. It has lungs. These natural corridors, whether they're forests, rivers, or trails, serve as vital pathways for not only physical travel, but also for the movement of knowledge, culture, language, and trade between our communities. I had a beautiful drive here this morning. Oh, I'm going off script. Saw the sunrise come up, driving down the road, but I was reminded with that sunrise and new beginnings, I started time travel in my mind, and I love to time travel every day, just seeing the landscape in front of me and how the land became the way it is now. But I was imagining a time about 170 years ago, before those roads existed, before those borders and boundaries, when our corridors were alive and well. At that time, you could walk from Niagara Falls to Tobermory under the canopy of the forest. So, yes, our landscape has changed. I think more than ever, those corridors are important to our way forward in the future. So historically, these corridors are essential for sustaining indigenous ways of life, facilitating seasonal movements of communities for hunting, fishing, gathering. We can tell with the season and the change of the colors of the leaves right now. I'm sure a lot of our tourists are traveling through our corridors to view the beautiful changing of the leaves. They provided access to sacred sites for spaces for ceremonies and teachings. They're also key in maintaining balance between ecosystems, supporting the migration of animals and the flow of water. So we understand this is critical to maintaining the health of both the land and its inhabitants. Really cool about Alice, thank you for sharing. That's something I'm keen to dive in more and go down a rabbit hole with. Yesterday I was actually listening to a podcast called Unreserved, and they're speaking about bison and reclaiming the bison's corridor. And bison actually lived all the way from Alaska down to Texas. So when you're talking about Yellowstone, and that's kind of in the heart of the bison's corridor. So I thought that was really interesting and really cool how all these things are connected in a web. So indigenous knowledge recognizes that everything in nature is connected, and these natural corridors are seen as arteries. Recently, I was researching Leonardo da Vinci, and he had a theory that humans are modeled after the earth. And so when you look at our veins, at our central nervous system, much like the rivers, the lakes, the deltas, the oceans that we have here on earth. So I thought that was pretty cool. So these corridors allowed for the movement of plants and animals, the interconnectedness of these species, and this has been well understood by our people for a millennium. For example, a river is not just a source of food or water, but part of a wider network that sustain entire ecosystems, linking different environments together in a web of life. Culturally, these corridors are woven into stories, teachings, and traditions. They're often places where the physical and spiritual worlds meet. Just going back to stories, teachings, and traditions, until somewhat recently, it was illegal for us to practice our language, our culture, our stories, our traditions. So we're still reclaiming this right now. That land acknowledgement that we did this morning, that's not for me as a First Nations person to do. That's for our settler allies to do for us. I'm reminded when the settlers first came, when your ancestors came to Turtle Island, and here we are at the heart of Turtle Island on the Great Lakes. They didn't bring with them any land. They didn't bring any land with them. They might have had dirt on their shoes. They might have had dirt under their fingernails. That's about all the earth they brought with them. So over a series of 19 treaties here in Saginaw Ojibwe Nation, that land was stolen from us. We now have 7 counties and 40 municipalities in our traditional territory. I use quotations when I say traditional territory because the Crown does not understand overlapping circles and how different First Nations could share land and corridors. The Crown. Yesterday, I was able to sit in a presentation by an Indigenous Anishinaabe knowledge keeper and storyteller, Isaac Murdoch. And it was interesting because we had a meeting between police and homeless people. And right now in Owen Sound, the police, they're preparing to remove an encampment by the river in downtown Owen Sound. 100% of the females at this encampment along the river are First Nations. 100%. That is a corridor. That is a river. Back in the day, King George and our ancestors, King George made a deal with us that we would have access to the water the length of 6 humans. And last night we did an exercise where 6 of us laid down and saw how long that was, that we should all have access to the water. That goes for settlers and First Nations. Sorry, sometimes with the work I do day to day, talking about treaties and land claims and land-based learning and how to protect Mother Earth, we walk on Mother Earth's back. We must walk with Mother Earth. We must flow with the water. Sometimes these things weigh heavily on me. The fact that I could have used a bathroom break and speaking about these things, sometimes I can get emotional. But then I know that's really, I'm speaking from my heart, and that's my true self.
Thank you.
So these spaces are not just for humans, but they're for larger living environment. This includes animals, plants, and the elements. So in our culture, as part of our medicine wheel, we believe in our 4 sacred elements: Shkode, the fire; Nabi, the water; Aki, the earth; and Nodin, the wind. And I noticed the wind earlier today was blowing leaves out of the trees, and I was a little distracted by the beauty out the side of the window. But preserving and respecting these corridors, it's therefore essential not only the well-being of ecosystems, but for maintaining cultural continuity and Indigenous relationships with the land. In short, nature corridors are more than roots or ecosystems. They are threads that bind together the social, cultural, and ecological fabric of Indigenous and settlers' lives. They continue to play an important role in the identity of the stewardship practices of Indigenous peoples today. And now I'm off script. Look out.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Kaylee, something you said there really spoke to me, and I'm sure spoke to Bruce and wherever George Knowles in the room. I remember when we were sitting around, I think at Bruce's place, talking about, and we just learned about the transaction of defecting Castle Glen. And we were talking, oh, there's got to be something we can do. There's got to be something we can do. And we all said at that time that it's got to be about so much more than just opposing something. That's easy to oppose something. We don't want to, we don't want that development. It's a NIMBY thing. I don't want it in my backyard. Put it somewhere else. In one sense, that's the easy part. And I really credit Bruce and others of the founders here who wanted to make this about something much grander, a much grander vision, something we can all aspire to. And the interconnectedness that you spoke about is really at the core of what I think we're trying to do here. We're trying to create something that is not just a physical interconnectedness. We're trying to create a legacy and protect the very elements that you spoke about. So thank you for being so articulate in the way that you, and passionate about the way that you spoke about it. And with a nice little segue from that is one of the first groups that we turned to, and one of the first people we spoke to back in COVID. And I remember we were on Zoom. Was Tom. And the Coutts to Escarpment Eco Park system is one of those examples of a really diverse group coming together in, frankly, a pretty challenging urbanized space to protect something that's very special. And I would suspect that maybe a lot of the people in this room don't know about your corridor that you've created. So, Tom, could you talk a little bit about where it came from and how it's got a very unique management system? And I think there's a lot of lessons for us to learn there too.
Sure, thanks, Tom. Number one.
Actually, I think we have a map as well of the Coutts. One of
I'll
these.
say your,
that's the. There you go. That was the one. There we go. Yeah. And keep going. I think there's another that there should. Yes. Okay. Here it is. There's several of them here, but go ahead. You get a sense of where we are around the Hamilton Harbor.
I'll also add you're much taller in person than on that screen.
Zoom lies.
Yeah. So hi everyone. My name's Tom, and I help coordinate a voluntary park alliance between 9 landowning government and non-government agencies that work out of the heart of Burlington and Hamilton, Ontario. We're a small but mighty group. We're sort of a mini Yellowstone to Yukon, or Algonquin to Adirondacks. We don't have an Alice running around, but we do have a family of Blandings turtles that somehow, on an annual basis, traverse through highways, backyards, up the escarpment, and then back down to Coutts Paradise Marsh. We also have over 50 other species at risk that call this place home. We also have about a quarter of Canada's plant life right here. It's a biodiversity hotspot. Partners own and manage about 2,000 hectares of lands that have been identified as part of our system. And we're really talking about 10 kilometers squared. Again, very small, but mighty. This place is personal for me. My family immigrated from Poland to Hamilton when I was 4. We moved to Burlington when I turned 8, stayed there for most of my high school, and then went back to Hamilton to study at McMaster. Spent a few years traveling, was in Ottawa for a few more years after that, and then came back for this role in 2018. So this very, very western tip of Lake Ontario, it's home for me and my family. I've also been getting to know the southern shore of Georgian Bay. My partner's family is from Midland. It's an hour east of here. So I'm super thankful to spend a whole day with a room that's bursting, literally. There's folks sitting outside. Folks that are interested in what ecological corridors are and how we can connect places that I call home. It's fantastic. And thanks for the question. I think it's really important to talk about the first 6 years of the Eco Park system. I think there are some pivotal things that I know we've talked about over Zoom that might be helpful for this group. So let's go back to 2006. For our group, again, 9 government and nonprofit agencies. It took 6 years to agree to collaborate, to decide what we're collaborating on, and then how to collaborate. Our story about agreeing why we got together is pretty similar to what you folks are building up here. We all had a concern about Cootes Paradise Marsh, which is a property that Royal Botanical Gardens actually owns and manages. It has a lot of acronyms behind it. It's an ANSI, it's other things which I'm forgetting. Scientifically important area, home to a lot of different special species. Niagara Escarpment as well, obviously a UNESCO biosphere. And all the marshlands and terrestrial properties between. Fun fact, this is the only area between the Niagara Escarpment and any Lake Ontario watershed that doesn't have a 400 series highway or major infrastructure between it.
Really?
This tiny little sliver.
Wow.
So that was the reason why we agreed to come together and work together. Deciding what to do, well, that's our vision. And I happen to think it's really engaging, captivating, and it's still super relevant. What we work towards is a permanently protected and connected natural land sanctuary between Cootes Paradise Marsh and the Niagara Escarpment. And we had a lot of time spent in those 6 years talking about what that could mean. So permanently protected, what's that? There was a lot of folks around our table who thought this means designation. We need to turn our lands into something like a national park. So here you go, Parks Canada. Here are our lands. Enjoy. Not so fast, not really. It became really evident early on in our process that our partners weren't going to give up their lands. They're pretty happy doing what they do locally. Land securement. If you want to permanently protect land, buy it, own it. Okay, let's put a land trust together or something. Well, not so much. Getting that land is one step. What happens next? Open-ended question. The connected piece of our vision, I think, is the special sauce. I think it's that unique factor that's kept us together and has made us open to some creative initiatives and work on the ground. That opens the door for our neighbors to talk to us and each other. It's landowner outreach. You know, maybe some folks are interested in an easement or a donation. Or, like our colleague down there mentioned, there's a lot of folks that are interested in being good stewards, putting pollinator gardens or, you know, making stepping stone habitats between what we think as Western settlers' traditional protected areas. It opens the door for those kind of conversations. Roads. There's a lot of them in our area. Looking at connectivity opens the door for our municipal colleagues to start thinking about passages over or under roads. Really looking at infrastructure creatively. Again, to make sure that those really special places that are around us do connect for plants and wildlife. And even internally, looking at what we sort of, as again, Westerners think about protected areas, there's corridors within them. From my perspective, I've got cities at the table. You know, a baseball diamond's not a habitat, but there might be a creek behind it, or a sort of riparian buffer around that creek. That's more helpful for our plant and animal friends. So again, I think really the deciding what to do and our vision was an important step for us. And that combination of permanently protected and connected, especially the connected, has kept us together. Kelly's mentioned a few things about a landscape level approach, making sure there's planning in place so that that more holistic approach is there. I think that's really what our vision's about. It's at a very, very local level, bringing groups who can have a huge impact, whether it's municipalities or gardens, universities, and folks like yourself to really think about the whole place. And then, how do we do it? That was part of that 6-year conversation. We have a really, really, really simple model. I can chat about the governance and all the details either as a panel or just find me one-on-one. But I'll quickly just highlight some principles that have worked for us. Right off the bat, eco-park system, we don't own any land. It's really our partners that are doing the on-the-ground work, and they own properties. We have no authority. We don't tell partners what to do. We also don't speak for our partners. It is entirely a voluntary alliance. Any agency can say yes or no at any time. It's up to them to decide what of their lands are in the rough study area that you're seeing behind me, and it's just as easy to say we're out. No one's left yet, but so I think that's a good sign. And it's all about consensus and having an equal voice around the table. We try really, really hard not to have to make decisions. Our approach for now 15 years has been, if we can't get the group to decide on something, we haven't talked about it enough. So let's bring that forum together to have that conversation. And everyone around our table is equal, which is important for us because we have groups like the Hamilton Naturalist Club and the Bruce Trail Conservancy. You know, that's 2 staff, 20 stuff, 12? 25, ooh, that's pretty good. It's not a municipality though. That's not 100+ staff. But when you're at the eco-park system table, each of those agencies has an equal voice. The main message I've got is all we're about is relationship building. It's relationships, relationships, relationships. For 15 years, we've been trying to build those relationships between partner staff, landowners, stakeholders, Indigenous communities, to make sure that folks feel comfortable talking about each other and talking with each other and working towards that connectivity goal. And I'll stop there. I could keep going.
It's a remarkable example because I'll put my skeptical hat on. Had you told me we said 2006, that you're just going to get a bunch of people together and talk and that something's going to come from it, I would have put a lot, and it's remarkable that what you've accomplished with people of goodwill who come together. It really is. So that's one of the reasons why we thought it was so important to everyone to hear that story, because it can and does work. So moving from the foundational Indigenous experience to the local experience to the regional experience, if there is one example of a corridor, which I'm sure most Ontarians, one in this room, but most Ontarians could name as a corridor, it must be the Bruce Trail. I understand that the concept really started of an interconnected hiking trail that goes all the way from Niagara to Toronto, started in the 1950s? 60s. But in my conversations with you, Michael, I didn't realize that the trail was really seen as a means to an end. And maybe that's a fascinating story that I think people in this room may be a good place to start on the Bruce Trail experience.
Sure, thanks, Tom, and so grateful for everyone for coming out today and supporting the ECA, really great organization, so let's give them a round of applause. And yeah, so I know many people have heard of the Bruce Trail, and how many people have hiked on the Bruce Trail? Amazing. So these are our people, which is awesome. But
you're in friendly territory.
Yeah, but I'm happy, most people know about the Bruce Trail, but people don't understand that the Bruce Trail just sits within an ecological corridor, and that was always the vision. So when the founders started to notice development pressures along the Niagara Escarpment, it was never about creating the world's greatest hiking trail. That happened, and it's true, it is. But what ended up happening is that we set out to protect the Niagara Escarpment, and that's what we've been doing for 60 years. And I'm pleased to say that we're about 71.9% secure just over 60 years later, and we're laser focused on completing that conservation corridor. I think some of the challenges that happened in the 90s.
So can you just, sorry to interrupt, can you
Sure.
define that? So you say 71% of what? I mean, that might be, I mean.
Yeah, great question. So the Bruce Trail Conservation Corridor, which is essentially from Queenston all the way up to Tobermory,
Right.
71.9% of it is permanently protected. And our definition of that is that either we own the land or it's owned by a conservation authority, but it's meant to be land that's permanently protected. And truthfully and super respectfully, we used to consider conservation lands as protected forever, but recently, like, that's been sort of eroding. So we're watching that really carefully. So, but that traditionally was always our definition. So we think about that. But this ecological corridor is so important and so powerful, and I think the Bruce Trail Conservancy really is one of Canada's sort of great conservation success stories, because we're protecting land all across near urban nature, near some of the most populous places. And you know the Niagara Escarpment has globally rare plants and globally rare species. And I think, you know, to take it back to what Kaylee talked about in the beginning, I want to be absolutely super clear with everyone that we are using colonial tools to be able to secure the trail. The whole concept of ownership of land, we could have a 3-day conference just talking about that. But one of the things that I know that I'm proud of for the Bruce Trail is that from the very beginning, we've been guests up at Cape Croker, and some of our Indigenous friends were some of the first people to build the trail, including some of Kaylee's family. So I think that's an important legacy and a story that's not told. And then final thing on this corridor, which is something that ECA is really focusing on, is that the real success of the Bruce Trail Conservancy is the engagement of people. So again, the trail is the tool. So what we're trying to do is to get people to fall in love with nature so that they want to protect it. And so all of us need to learn how to reconnect with the land. That's critically important, because people are so disconnected. Within one generation, our lives have largely moved indoors and online. And we have a responsibility to future generations to teach them what's out there and why it's special and why it's important. And all of us in this room are going to be some of the last generations to see some of these species alive, and that's terrifying. So we're really proud of the work that we're doing. I'm happy to hear that you think about us as an ecological corridor, because I think Bruce Trail's famous for the hiking trail, but again, we're working really hard on protecting land, and I'm pleased to say that we just ended our fiscal year in June, but last year we protected 17 new nature reserves and almost 1,000 acres of Niagara Escarpment, and this year we're only 4 months in, and we've already secured 7 new nature reserves. So we're laser focused on protecting more land for Ontarians.
That's fantastic. And it's an obvious thing to say, but when you saw the map that was, you'll see again later, that is the beginning of our base map work. I mean, the Bruce Trail kind of snakes through it everywhere, and so the overlap between, you know, the phenomenal work that you and your organization have done and our aspirational work, what we're trying to do, is obvious, and so that, you know, your support in you know, helping us realize our vision for this area is very valuable. We really appreciate that.
Thanks. And if I could just add one more thing in terms of the transboundary issue. I mean, we go through 26 municipalities, 45 different conservation areas, provincial parks, national parks, Indigenous unceded territories. So the stakeholder relations and the people, the real people on the ground that care about these communities, critically important that you get people active. And government love to hear from successful organizations like us and talk about partnerships, but people have the real power, and so I want to make sure people walk away understanding that you can't rely on ECA or Bruce Trail to be the only voice with government. You need to get out there and talk to your local people and make sure that they understand the issues. So thank you, Tom.
Thank you for that reminder. Really, you know, a big theme of today, of this whole event, but these panels in particular, is we're hoping that some of these experts you've heard from and precedents you're hearing about are going to inspire you not only to give the ECA advice on things that we should be doing and prioritizing and steps that we should be taking, but hopefully is going to inspire each one of you to go away and do something and be part of this in a small way, to reach out, to contact others, to lobby, to do whatever little bit that you feel you can do. And that's I mean, I think these examples that we've heard of so far are all about grassroots examples where broad coalitions of people came together to accomplish something really, really magical, and that's we're trying to follow in your successful footsteps, which is a very talk about successful footsteps. So I was very pleased to see when Kelly put up the Bhutan map.
I wasn't so pleased, but that's okay.
So it just goes to show that this concept of protected nature corridors is hardly a Canadian or Ontario invention. But Stephen, the organization that you were formerly a project director for, the Trans-Bhutan Trail, supported projects to protect some of those natural corridors in Bhutan. And in the description you've given to us, I was fascinated by the background of it, by the extent of the protection that's happened there, but also some interesting factoids about Bhutan itself that made this challenging and interesting. So
Yeah,
maybe
thanks, Tom. And just for a little bit of context, I did try to convince Jarvis to fly one of our colleagues from Bhutan over, but they decided it wasn't in the budget. So consider me as a bit of a messenger today. They call them GARPs in Bhutan. And for other context, my wife Kathy Smart, just sitting over there, and I spent 3 years working in Bhutan with the Royal Secretariat. And when I say royal, I mean the Bhutanese royal, not the British royal family. Royal Secretariat on a national restoration of the ancient trail across Bhutan, primarily in order to provide an opportunity for young people in Bhutan to walk their own nation and give them experience on the land. And the first question I get when I'm asked about Bhutan is, where is it? And so just to backstep one piece, tiny country in the Himalayas between China, Tibet in the north, and India on the south. The joke in Bhutan is if India burps or China farts, we feel it. Am I allowed to say fart? Okay. Anyways, for Canadians, the easiest context for you is that it's about the size and population of Vancouver Island. Wow. And one of the things in this bringing our kind of conversation full circle is that Bhutan was never colonized. So if you flip up the next slide, which most of you will be familiar with, this is what happens when you have an indigenous nation deciding on what to do with their land. So Bhutan is protected, constitutionally protected, 60% forest cover. They have, and that's constitutionally protected. Right now it's at about 70%. So I was thinking, Mike, for your next project, you can work on changing the Canadian Constitution to see if we can get more. And you can see the corridors here. There's about 3,600 square kilometers of biological corridors. And the definition in Bhutan is that there are corridors for all sentient beings. It's a Buddhist country. And so they believe deeply in the connection between nature, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. It is a biological diversity hotspot, so they have more species diversity than most places in the world, and they are have got many species of endangered, near endangered species. The white-bellied heron count for last year was 27. And that's good news because the one before that was 14. So they're very, very focused on protecting species, but also the culture of the country. I guess a couple of lessons to take away from Bhutan, or at least that we took away from Bhutan, I think, which would be helpful. First of all, I think, and Kelly already alluded to it, this is something that you have good company around the world, that there are people who are consciously working on these efforts everywhere. You're not alone, and that's something to gain some strength from. So making those connections, those thin threads around the planet are just as important as the threads that we're sewing in our own communities. And I think about it in definition terms as more of kind of, you were talking earlier about the glue that connects together. I think about it in terms of a string of pearls, and that we're stringing together these pearls everywhere we can, and that string is so very important to it. So that's the one thing. The other thing, which we've alluded to a little bit here, but I think is really vastly important, is that in the Bhutanese context, there is very little distinction between ecological and cultural conservation, that the two are completely intertwined, that there are spirits in the landscape, and the land is part of the people. And the more connection you can have like that, we talked about the challenges of political creations. Anything we create politically is potentially weak. But if it's culturally embedded, if people believe deeply in it, then it is protected. So I thought when I was coming here, I was thinking, what's a good example is Central Park. You know, Central Park is a politically protected area, but culturally, nobody would dare put a condominium on Central Park because it is so deeply embedded. So that's the kind of level of cultural connectivity that needs to be created, because any political creation is always in jeopardy at some point or other. And there was a third one. I'm going to remember it just quickly. And we've already said it, and you're already doing it here. That's the third one, is to create that network, that alliance of people. And the one thing that I would say, since we've already talked about it a great deal today, but the question that I would put out to people here today is, you've created an incredible alliance here. We had, in the case of Bhutan, we were connecting 28 giwogs, which is regional government areas, and the people from each to ensure the ownership, local ownership. And I guess one of the questions for this group moving forward is, you've created an incredible alliance in a very short period of time. Who isn't in the room? So who do we still need to talk to? Who do we need to reach out to in order to make that alliance, that connectivity that much stronger? So
it's interesting. You've all, in slightly different ways, but made a common point here, which I hadn't thought of in our discussions previously. And we're really all talking about connectedness of the broader community, of the broader culture, of, you know, and I think, I'm sure that just by nature of the people who are in this room, I'm sure virtually every one of you spends lots of time hiking in the trails around here and on the Bruce Trail, and I certainly know I do. But that's not the case with everybody. And so I think part of the, and Michael, you spoke about it specifically, about creating a trail to encourage Ontarians to get on that trail, because by getting on that trail, they realize the wonder that is around them, and suddenly they want to protect that area. And surely that has to be maybe one of the takeaways that we need to really think about, is how can we, as an organization, as a group, as individuals, ensure that we are connecting and reaching out to make sure that a lot of the people around here may not be getting out and exploring those trails and realizing the importance of those corridors and the wilderness around them. So anyway, that's...
Or if I can say, they're experiencing them in different ways. You know, they may be hunters, they may be snowmobilers, all sorts of other ways that they feel strongly about the area and the region, and you need to find that common ground.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is not meant to be just a gab fest for me asking questions. I do have a lot of questions I'd be happy to ask, but I'm going to pause here, and please, if any of this discussion has raised questions, thoughts, comments, please raise your hand. We'll get a microphone to you, or I can repeat. Oh, here's one over here. If you speak loud, I will try and, okay. There we go. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Jacob. I loved the emphasis on connectivity here. I recently Teachers College, and I definitely noticed there's a lot of disconnect with the youth, which made me want to incorporate this kind of stuff in my education. So this is a great question, I think, for this panel and for Kelly as well. But really, do you see like a systemic framework being created to like implement this kind of stuff in schools, and not just like talking about it, but like you're saying, experiencing this kind of work, and even like rather than participating in the corridor, like leading these corridors, and like maybe that helping expand these biosphere reserves kind of thing.
Kaylee, that's your professional expertise. Why don't you handle that one?
Miigwech, thank you, Jacob. Is it Jacob Proctor? Yeah. I've been meaning to get a hold of you. Awesome, well, we're connecting now. I'm blessed that I get to be out on the land with children every day. Here in Ontario, it's been written into legislation for Indigenous studies and land-based learning. However, I don't think anyone planned ahead and who was going to facilitate that. This year I've had hundreds of teachers come to me, ask me for materials, texts, quizzes, direction.
Time.
Our teachers right now are silos, and each individual teacher is trying to make a lesson plan. That's kind of sad. But on a positive note, and I wanted to take some time to do this and get interactive with you. From a kindergarten class, the class on our reserve, I actually learned a really cool land acknowledgement. And so maybe this is something you'd take with you. But if I can ask everyone to join me, we're going to stand up.
Seventh inning stretch.
And I have a lot of friends in this room, a lot of my trail family, and we've hiked together, so some of you have already done this with, but I encourage everyone to take this home with you. So right now we're going to pretend that the ceiling is the sky, and that the lights are the sun, and that the floor is the earth. But if you can join me and repeat my words after me, the first step is the hardest. So we're going to bend over. Take your time. This is the land.
This is the land.
This is the sky.
This is the sky.
These are my friends.
These are my friends.
And here am I.
And here am I.
Miigwech, Mother Earth,
Miigwech, Mother Earth,
for allowing us to learn on the land.
for allowing us to learn on the planet.
You can be seated.
Fantastic.
So I just wanted to touch on a couple things there. I would encourage everyone to touch the earth every day, to be grounded, to kick off your shoes, to touch the water, to flow with the water. When I said these are our friends, I meant all of you, of course, my trail family here, my new friends, but I meant all of our relations, all living things. The sky, the sun, the moon, the stars, the clouds, the wind, the four-legged, the three-legged. My grandma had a three-legged dog. Us two-legged. The creepy crawlies, the insects, the amphibians, the reptiles, the fish, the water, the stone, the escarpment, all of these things. So that's our family. That's our community. We don't always get to pick our family. So when I was acknowledging self-awareness, self-respect, self-love, love is the foundation of all things, so everything starts there. Important to nurture that in the children too. And then when we're doing this, that is sign language for applause. We were showing Mother Earth love and respect, and I'd encourage you to do that every day in your walk. But Jacob, we're going to connect, and we'll speak further about that.
Thank you
Absolutely.
for your question, Jacob. Oh, here's another question here.
Thanks. I think this is really encouraging, and thank you all for all the work that you've already done and continue to do. The one thing that I worry about is continuity and consistency through generations, through political cycles, and I just wonder if we have a plan to address how to sustain these initiatives through generations and political cycles, which are important.
thank you for raising that question. I mean, it's I think that there's a secondary point as well, which I would love to hear. So what is it? How do we sustain this politically through political cycles? But also, I'll put my skeptic hat here on. Is it sometimes easier for a politician or a government to say, yeah, I'll agree to protect this little corridor here, it might be 6 feet wide, because it's a whole lot easier to do that than to save the Great Bear Rainforest or something. Is it an excuse for political leaders to cop out a little bit? So, please.
Yeah, thanks for the great question. So I think in terms of sustainability of the movement and so on and so forth, the Bruce Trail, as an example, has been around a long time, and I know that we've set up the organization that even once we complete this conservation corridor, protecting the land is really only the first step. Then you have to take care of it, and that takes generations and generations and generations. So we've got lots of future work there for people. But on engaging with elected officials who sometimes absolutely get a bad rap, but there's lots of great champions for nature out there, and people are connected to places. So just as you're connected to places, our elected officials grew up somewhere, they live somewhere, they also went outside. And so it's just engaging with them and reminding them the importance of what's there. It's a complicated world in politics, but I think when you can take them out of the office and bring them onto the trail or a natural place and remind them and get them to fall in love with the nature, then I've seen powerful things happen for sure. So thank you.
Could I add to that? Democracy. Democracy is not something that is forced on someone. However, I would argue that our First Nation is an occupied nation. This colonialism has been forced on our people. And I'm reminded of two-eyed seeing and what that means, with Western and Indigenous knowledge having equal view. And so my elder and mentor, knowledge keeper, storyteller, Lenore Kijig, who some of you might know, she would tell me a story of two-eyed seeing. And I'm gonna shrink this 15, 20-minute story down to just a moment. But our cultural hero, Nanabush, some of you might know Nanabush or Nanabojo. Nanabush was the first human. Nanabush was a shapeshifter, a trickster, a jokester. Nanabush makes lots of mistakes, and so we learn valuable lessons. A lot of his stories have to do with poop, pee, and sex, and those are some of the most valuable lessons you can learn. But one day, and again I'm paraphrasing and shrinking this story, Nanabush loses his eyes, and Nanabush is blind. And so Nanabush finds a mouse, and Nanabush steals one of the mouse's eyes, and he puts that eye in his socket. Nanabush continues on his way, and he comes upon a bison. He asks that bison for permission to borrow his eye. And so the bison gives him an eye, and he puts it in his other socket. And so now Nanabush is crooked and not quite able to see straight, although he has two eyes. Again, one of those eyes was borrowed, one of those eyes was taken. So I think as we get out and vote, or as we move forward in this political process, we really have to embrace what is two-eyed seeing, and how do we level those eyes? How do we actually get those eyes to be equal and balanced? So,
Great
yeah.
analogy. Great analogy. Tom, and I think Stephen as well had this answer, so it's a very good question because it's engendering lots of answers.
Yeah, and just one thing to add from my nonprofit government lens, there's a big difference between institutional relationships and personal relationships. And I think that's critical to answering a question like yours. And it's something I'm learning with a lot of Indigenous friends walking me through what it actually means to have a personal relationship. I often work in the former, that institutional lens, where I'm working to build relationships between conservation authorities and municipalities and nonprofits. That's not going to sustain a movement or anything like that. It really takes those one-on-one relationships between whether it's a staff person, an Indigenous person, neighbor, going out for a walk, talking, really trying to understand each other and building a bridge. So when you're thinking about intergenerational momentum, keeping things going, take a young person out for a walk. You know, it doesn't have to be that complicated. And ultimately, really, if we're really talking about relationships, it's that personal connection first.
And Stephen, did you have something you were going to add there? I think we're good. Yeah, okay, that's good. Time for one more question, I think, but go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, thanks very much. My name is Donald Avery. I'm a retired academic. I've taught at Western for 35 years in the distant past. I have 2 points I'd like to make. One is the biosphere phenomena and its popularity relative in Canada, where we have, I think, 17, and in the United States, what, 26? 28. Given the fact that Canada is 1/10 the size, obviously the biosphere system was much more popular here than it was in the United States, and I'm really intrigued why. Because while I enjoyed your talk immensely, I didn't really get a kind of understanding of that differential. The other is a recent development, and that is that the Niagara Escarpment Biosphere Reserve, which was established in 1890, has recently been transformed and is no longer under the auspices of the Niagara Escarpment Commission. In other words, the government has no direct influence. It's now a registered private non-government organization. And in fact, it's been changed in terms of its official title to reserve, away from the idea of reserve and to network. With reserve having a very negative connotation. And the governance system now calls for dual presidents, one of whom must be an Indigenous person. And that the board is at least 2 of the 5 members of the board must be of Indigenous background.
That's interesting.
So this is something that has happened over the last roughly 18 months. And they actually submitted their report, which is mandated by UNESCO, on what the last 10 years have represented. And it's I think, a wonderful...
I think we have at least 2 directors of the NEDN.
Exactly. Oh, do we? There.
At least 2.
Yeah, great.
If I can speak to that, I'm on the board of the Niagara Escarpment Biosphere Network. And we just had a meeting yesterday. My colleague Jeff was there, and Annette.
Yeah, who are the other directors?
Who are the other directors?
Yeah,
Raise your hands. If,
Niagara Escarpment Biosphere Network directors that are here. Mark had to leave, but Jeff? Yeah.
And Annette Sandberg's here somewhere as well.
Somewhere. Yeah.
So to speak to that, the Niagara Escarpment Commission, a government organization, UNESCO said that biosphere could not be managed by a government institution. And so the Niagara Escarpment Biosphere Network was created. We are a group that networks. We're networking right now. So every 10 years, we have to reapply for a biosphere status. The Niagara Escarpment Commission, unfortunately, they were a little reluctant to share their data with us. So that report really came down to like 1 minute to midnight. In speaking with UNESCO, they have a lot of recommendations, one being co-managed. And so one of our co-chairs is from my community, Charlene Winger-Jones. But this reminds me of UNDRIP and other recommendations by the UN. Again, 94 recommendations here for Canada. The UN has a lens on us. UNESCO is looking at us to follow through and be good Canadians. However, if you look at UNDRIP and those 94 recommendations, Canada's only installed a third of them. When I speak to my friends in New Zealand and Australia, they let me know that Canada as a nation is about 20, 25 years behind in that journey of reconciliation. However, back to the Niagara Escarpment Biosphere Network and hopes and dreams for the future. We have been relationship building and networking. We've been going to First Nations on Manitoulin and trying to create relationships to see if there's potential to extend the biosphere. The escarpment does not just run from Niagara Falls to Tobermory, it runs from New York to Wisconsin. Long-term goals, we might be able to create the first international biosphere. So a lot of work will go into that. Yesterday we had a board meeting and we were kind of trying to figure out our strategic plan, trying to figure it out. But that's relationship building as well, that starts with that. Really quickly, I wanted to acknowledge the Bruce Trail as well, and that half of the Bruce Trail runs through Saugeen Ojibwe Nation traditional territory. Again, I want to use traditional territory. I'm going to use a couple moments because I have the mic. But that is a political statement between our First Nation and different levels of government. My ancestors harvested blueberries at French River, moose at Parry Sound, Magnetawan, and deer, Wawashkesh, down at Kitchener-Waterloo. So I'd argue that our actual traditional territory is much larger than the map you saw earlier. However, the Crown does not understand overlapping circles. And real quick about the Crown, and I'm just using the opportunity because I have the mic. I was told a story recently from an elder about a First Nations elder who was to be hung for hunting. He was hunting on, this is back in the day, but he was hunting on Crown land and they determined that was illegal, and so he was to be hung. They asked him if he had any last words, and he said, "I did not steal anyone's crown. I did not steal anyone's crown." So what were our ancestors understanding when the land was taken from us? My ancestors, they signed those treaties with their totems. They did not know English. They did not have a signature. They signed it with their clan symbols. Like myself, I am Crane Clan, G-Jack. I now have this tattoo on my hand to remind me when I sign my name, I've stopped signing my name. I sign my clan symbol because I wanted to create a conversation. But thank you for your questions and thank you for letting me abuse the mic.
Thank you, everybody. When we were planning this conversation and having some Zoom calls to talk about where we wanted to take it, I was a little nervous that we might not be able to fill up a full hour. I think we could fill up 4 hours. And so thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for the 7th inning stretch, which was great to get up and move. Jarvis, I'll hand it over to you but let me first thank Stephen, Michael, Tom, and Kaylee for their attention.